The summer heat of Willow Creek Heights was a thick, oppressive blanket, but for Jake Sorensen, it was the sound of children's joy, and his own success, that made it bearable. His backyard, a riot of custom woodwork and tropical landscaping, centered around a small, sparkling saltwater pool. It was, admittedly, a magnet for his niece and nephew, Maya and Leo, whose visits were punctuated by the kind of shrieks and splashes that signaled pure, uncomplicated summer fun. This idyllic scene was shattered, not by a storm, but by the relentless, high-pitched ringing of the doorbell. Jake, 38, built like a brick shed and wearing nothing but swim trunks, pulled open the door to find his neighbor, Ms. Patricia, Patty, Chadwick, standing stiffly on his welcome mat. Patty, or Karen as the entire neighborhood secretly dubbed her, was a woman whose entire persona was dedicated to the eradication of spontaneity. Her manicured lawn was pristine, her expression perpetually pinched. "Mr. Sorensen," she began, the name itself sounding like an accusation. She held a clipboard, always a clipboard, and wore a look of grim determination. "I am here regarding the unacceptable decibel levels emanating from your property." "Patty," Jake replied, forcing a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The kids are having a great time. It's Saturday, 2 p.m. We're well within the community's noise ordinance hours," I checked. "That is a gross misinterpretation of the spirit of the ordinance," she sniffed, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "The rule is, excessive and continuous noise. The shrieking, Mr. Sorensen, the continuous shrieking of those two, offspring, is distressing my emotional well-being and, more importantly, distracting me from my work as a freelance consultant." Jake leaned against the doorframe, his amusement hardening into irritation. "They're 8 and 6, Patty. They're playing in a pool. What would you like me to do? Tranquilize them?" "I would like you to enforce quiet time," she stated flatly. "Or, install a sound-dampening barrier. Failing that, I will be filing a formal complaint with the HOA, citing Section 4, Subsection B, noise pollution, disrupting the peace and tranquility of adjacent properties." The threat was real. Patty was the resident watchdog, and the HOA board were weary, middle-aged men who prioritized quiet over everything else. Jake wasn't just dealing with pool noise, he was dealing with the sanctity of Patty's self-appointed reign. "Fine," Jake said, his voice dropping an octave. "I'll talk to them. But if I have to compromise their fun for your freelance consulting, you should know that I have a couple of new tenants in my sunroom that are significantly less accommodating than children." He gave her a cryptic smile and closed the door before she could formulate a response. Patty stood on the porch for a moment, clipboard clutched tightly, a spark of confusion mixed with offense flaring in her eyes. Jake didn't just back down, he promised a different kind of trouble. Inside, the pool party quieted, but a different noise was brewing. Jake walked past the sunroom, a repurposed, climate-controlled porch, and opened the solid oak door just enough to peer inside. Two magnificent parrots, an African gray named Captain and an Amazon named Echo, regarded him with startlingly intelligent, deep-set eyes. Captain, the gray, let out a noise that sounded exactly like the squeal of a rusty garden gate. Jake laughed, but it was a calculating sound. Jake was a man who worked in sound design for film studios, he was a literal master of audio. He understood frequency, acoustics, and the psychological effects of specific noises. He was also a connoisseur of revenge best served with a twist of irony. If Patty wanted peace, he would give it to her, but only after she learned the true, soul-grinding meaning of excessive and continuous noise. He told the kids to keep it down, explaining that the neighbor was sensitive. They complied instantly, their pool games turning to quiet, underwater antics. Jake went back inside, but he didn't head to the kitchen. He went to the sunroom, pulled out his tablet, and began setting up a sophisticated microphone array near Captain and Echo's cages. "All right, boys," he murmured, rubbing Captain's head. "She wants a show. Let's give her a special concert." The conflict wasn't over. It had just been reassigned. Patty had complained about the sound of joy. Now, Jake was going to weaponize the sound of annoyance, and he was using two brilliant, highly vocal avian spies to do it. Part 1 Beat, Irony. The compliant pool area was now silent, giving Patty exactly what she asked for, but Jake's calm compliance masked the meticulous preparation for a much more targeted, acoustic war waged by two tropical saboteurs. For the next 4 days, a strange, new quiet descended upon Jake's backyard. The kids were gone, and the pool was only disturbed by the slow ripple of the filter. Patty, observing from her own back window, a fortress of thick, noise-dampening glass, felt a perverse satisfaction. She had won. Jake Sorensen had been humbled by the threat of bureaucracy. But the silence was deceptive. Inside the sunroom, Jake was conducting a series of elaborate, meticulous training sessions with Captain and Echo. These were not mere pets, they were instruments of vengeance. Jake had trained them for years to do complex vocal mimicry for sound effects in his work, but now, the targets were personal. The first step was reconnaissance. Jake installed a tiny, parabolic microphone disguised as a bird feeder near the property line, pointed directly at Patty's back patio and the wall of her home office. Over 2 days, he recorded her schedule: 7 a.m., the ping of her automated coffee maker; 10:15 a.m., the distinctive, high-pitched whine of her laptop charger engaging; 1 p.m., the soft, distinctive chime of her expensive, Swiss grandfather clock. Crucially, he learned her work hours: 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, a sacred time where her concentration was paramount. The second step was the selection of the repertoire. Jake didn't want simply to be loud, he wanted to be unbearable. He needed sounds that were innocuous in isolation but psychologically grating and disruptive when deployed randomly and perfectly timed. "No, Captain, not the fire alarm," Jake coached, sitting cross-legged on the sunroom floor, tossing a sunflower seed. The African Grey, a master mimic, had produced a flawless copy of the shrill beep-beep-beep of a smoke detector with a dying battery. Too short. We need sustained irritation. They settled on 3 primary weapons. The dripping faucet, the slow, rhythmic plink, plink, plink of water torture, a sound universally grating, particularly during moments of silence and concentration. Echo, the Amazon, with his deep chest and incredible breath control, mastered it within hours. The broken record skip, the horrific, high-frequency skreep of a vinyl record getting stuck. This sound was designed to be deployed exactly when Patty was on a conference call, breaking the flow of speech with a jarring, unpredictable spike. The doorbell/package delivery, a hyper-realistic imitation of the UPS delivery man's quick, impatient knock-knock-knock and the familiar thud of a box being dropped. The sound of an urgent, required interruption. The timing was everything. Jake worked late into the night, using the sound files he'd recorded of her routine to set up cues. He'd play the coffee maker sound for the birds, prompting them to begin a sequence of their own sounds, teaching them to respond to specific audio triggers. On Friday morning, the stage was set. Patty, sipping her coffee in her pristine office, felt a sense of vindication. The neighborhood was finally subdued. She settled in for her 9 a.m. video call with a client in Seattle. Precisely at 9:07 a.m., just as Patty leaned forward to deliver a crucial point about market synergy, Echo, positioned by an open window just across the fence line, let out a sound so perfect it felt impossible, the slow, maddening plink, plink, plink of a kitchen faucet that desperately needed a new washer. Patty's brow furrowed. She muted herself on the call. The sound was faint, but undeniably present, coming from somewhere near her kitchen. She excused herself, muttering about a sudden maintenance issue. She checked every faucet in her house, tightening handles, examining pipes. Nothing. The sound stopped the moment she opened the under-sink cabinet. She returned to her office, confused, but the call was salvageable. At 10:30 a.m., just as she was focused on a complex spreadsheet, Captain produced the most flawless imitation of her expensive, personalized cell phone ringtone, the one she only used for her most important client. Patty leaped out of her chair, scrambling for her phone, only to find it silent. The sound ceased, replaced by a low, contented parrot call. Patty sat back down, her heart racing. It was psychological warfare, so subtle she couldn't be sure it wasn't her imagination, or a faulty drain, or a ghost in the machine. But her focus was gone, replaced by a creeping, gnawing paranoia. She was starting to realize that the silence she had demanded had been replaced by a quiet, targeted chaos. Part 2: Beat, Suspense and Escalation. The subtle, targeted sonic disruptions introduced a profound psychological element to the conflict. Patty couldn't complain to the HOA about a phantom dripping faucet or a ghost ringtone, but the relentless, perfect auditory illusions were chipping away at her mental well-being and, crucially, her professional performance. The subtle warfare of the initial days quickly escalated into a full-scale, sustained campaign. Patty Chadwick was becoming a wreck. Her freelance consulting required laser focus, and she hadn't been able to maintain a single uninterrupted hour of concentration since Friday. She was drinking coffee by the gallon, snapping at customer service agents, and suffering from a persistent, low-level thrum of anxiety. The Parrots were brilliant. Jake had set up a feedback system. The moment the sound microphone registered a spike in noise from Patty's side, a door slamming, a frustrated sigh, or the start of a new video call, the birds would deploy a pre-selected sound. It was the Pavlovian conditioning of a neighbor being trained by two feathered tyrants. Monday was pure agony. At 11 a.m., Patty was in a high-stakes call with a potential new contract, her voice a calm, professional murmur. Patty's focus shattered. "One moment, please," she muttered, her eyes darting to her window. "A package." She rushed to the front door, heart pounding, convinced it was the important document she'd been waiting for. The porch was empty. Her camera feed showed nothing. Confused and embarrassed, she returned to her desk, only to find the client had disconnected. The next day, she decided to take action. She couldn't prove the noise was coming from Jake's property, it was too quick, too disguised, too perfectly timed. But she could contain her own side. She spent a frantic afternoon purchasing thick, acoustic dampening foam, covering the walls of her home office, and even erecting a tall, temporary canvas barrier along her fence line with Jake's property, ostensibly for privacy. Jake watched the installation of the barrier with quiet satisfaction. He knew it would only make the next phase more dramatic. "They're trying to block the signal, Captain," he chuckled, pointing to the makeshift fence. The African Grey responded with a startlingly accurate imitation of Patty's own, pinched, "This is completely unacceptable." That night, Jake began phase 2. He didn't just train the birds on new sounds, he trained them on amplified sounds, utilizing the space between his sunroom and the fence line to create a small, acoustic echo chamber. The new repertoire included the power tool symphony, the high-pitched, tooth-jarring whine of an electric saw, the rapid, percussive brrrra tap-tap of a pneumatic nail gun, and the low, relentless vzzzzzzzz of a sander. The alarm clock cascade, an ear-splitting series of cheap, digital alarm clock beeps set to go off at random, highly irregular intervals. The seagull dive bomb, a sound Patty had complained about during a coastal vacation, the piercing, insistent cry of a gull convinced it was about to snatch your food. Wednesday morning was the debut. Patty was on her porch, enjoying a rare moment of peace with a cup of chamomile tea, confident her barrier and foam had restored order. At 9:15 a.m., the sound of an industrial-grade electric saw erupted from Jake's yard. It was so loud, so sudden, and so close that Patty visibly flinched, spilling hot tea on her white shorts. The sound was not constant, it was the start-stop of someone using the saw, the screeching teeth cutting into wood, the noise escalating and then vanishing, only to reappear 5 seconds later. She stormed to the barrier. "Sorensen. What are you doing over there?" No response. The saw stopped. Silence. She retreated, wiping her leg. 5 minutes later, the high-pitched whine of a power drill started, interspersed with the rapid-fire brrrra tap-tap of the nail gun. The sound suggested an aggressive, large-scale construction project that would last for weeks. Patty's resolve broke. She was shaking, her tea ruined, her quiet morning destroyed by the persistent illusion of chaos. She finally called the HOA, her voice thin and reedy. He's building something. A structure. It's continuous construction noise, all power tools. Section 4, subsection B. The HOA representative, a tired man named Gary, promised to send a team out for an inspection the following day. Patty felt a surge of triumph mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. She had Jake now. Construction noise was a clear violation. But Jake was watching the unfolding drama from his sunroom, a smirk playing on his lips. He knew the inspection was coming. The moment Patty hung up, he turned to Captain. "Okay, pal," he whispered. "Time for the crescendo. The full-on emergency." Part 3 beat, escalating conflict and false security. Patty's attempt to erect a physical barrier failed, instead providing a clear target and a cue for Jake to unleash a symphony of highly disruptive, industrial sounds. Her complaint to the HOA, based on the illusion of construction, set up the perfect trap for Jake's final, most audacious sonic attack. Thursday, 10 a.m. Patty Chadwick stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed, radiating a triumphant anticipation that belied the dark circles under her eyes. The three-person HOA inspection team, Gary, the weary representative, and two colleagues, stood beside her, clipboards out, ready to issue the violation. "I'm telling you, Gary," Patty insisted, pointing to the canvas barrier, "it's a construction site over there. Saws, drills, all day. It's continuous. It's absolutely destroying my business. You'll hear it the moment he starts up again." Gary adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Chadwick, we haven't heard a thing since we pulled up. Are you certain he's actively working right now?" "He always starts around now," she hissed, frustration making her voice crack. "Just wait." The air was still, heavy, and silent. Not a bird cheeped, not a saw whined. Jake's backyard was a picture of suburban calm, the pool shimmering innocently in the sunlight. Jake himself was nowhere to be seen. They waited for 5 agonizing minutes. Patty was fidgeting, scanning the barrier, willing the sounds to return. Then, from the direction of Jake's property, a faint, almost melodic sound began. It was the clear, beautiful whistle of a tropical bird, followed by a soft, conversational murmur. It sounded like a pet owner quietly talking to his exotic birds. "See?" Gary said, checking his watch. "Sounds like he just has some pets. They're pretty quiet." Sounds suddenly, a loud, clear, human voice boomed out. "Warning! Warning! Immediate evacuation required. Gas leak in Zone 3. The voice was male, authoritative, and sounded exactly like the automated announcement on an airport tram, followed by the terrifying, continuous whoop 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 of a highly urgent industrial alarm. The HOA team jumped, their heads whipping around. Patty gasped, covering her ears. The noise was terrifying, loud, and sustained, but it was also impossible to place. It sounded institutional, not domestic. "What was that?" one of the inspectors stammered. Gary frowned, pointing his clipboard toward the fence. "That sounds like an automated evacuation system." "I don't think that's a resident, Patty." The alarm abruptly cut out, replaced by an unnervingly high-fidelity imitation of a baby crying, a wrenching, soul-destroying wail of pure misery. "And now a baby?" Gary looked thoroughly confused. "Patty, is there a new family next door with a baby and a—" "No." Patty shrieked, her control dissolving. "It's the parrots. The birds. He's training them to make these noises. He is orchestrating a campaign of acoustic terrorism against me because I complained about his pool noise." She sounded utterly unhinged. The inspectors exchanged concerned glances. Jake, watching the entire performance via a hidden camera feed and using a remote control to cue Captain and Echo from inside his sound-dampened sunroom, gave his next command. Sound the sound of a police siren, a rising and falling who, began directly by the fence line, so loud it seemed an emergency vehicle was parked on Jake's lawn. It was followed by the sharp, metallic crash of a garbage can being overturned. Gary, a stickler for rules, finally had something concrete. Okay, the siren and the crashing are excessive noise. We have a legitimate complaint here. We need to go next door. As they strode toward Jake's front door, Patty's eyes darted wildly, convinced she was vindicated. But Jake was waiting for them. He had preemptively removed the birds from the sunroom and put them in a temporary, sound-dampened annex in his garage. The sunroom was spotless. Jake opened the door, dressed in a professional polo shirt and khakis, looking like the picture of an upstanding, slightly confused citizen. "Gentlemen, Miss Chadwick," Jake said smoothly. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Sorensen," Gary said officiously, "we are here regarding a noise complaint. We heard a loud police siren and crash moments ago. Are you doing any work in your backyard?" Jake looked genuinely puzzled. "A siren? A crash? That's strange. I was just in my sunroom, working on a sound edit for a client. Everything is sound dampened in there. I'll open it up for you." He led them to the sunroom. It was silent, tidy, filled with expensive, pristine audio equipment, and clearly designed to keep noise in, not let it out. No tools. No construction. No giant cages. "As you can see, gentlemen," Jake gestured to the room, "ideal in sound, but I am very respectful of my neighbor's peace." He paused, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I did hear what sounded like an emergency vehicle pass by on the street, and maybe a garbage truck on the corner, but my yard is clear." The inspectors looked at each other. They had heard a police siren and a crash, yes. But the other sounds, the baby crying, the evacuation announcement, the phantom construction, Patty had sounded hysterical describing those. Patty was standing in the doorway, her mouth agape, seeing only the silent, sterile sunroom. She looked, to the three men, like a woman who had cracked under the pressure of summer heat. "Patty," Gary sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We can't find anything here. It seems." Jake stepped in, his expression sympathetic. "Patty, I know the heat can make people sensitive to noise. Maybe you're just stressed. I promise, I'm just working on my edits." Patty knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that Jake was lying. But the evidence was gone, and her own credibility was decimated. She was caught in a trap of perfect, engineered acoustic deception. Part 4 Beat, Justice/Twist. Patty's attempt to use the HOA for official justice backfired spectacularly. Jake's flawless orchestration of the special concert, using the birds for the noise and the sound-dampened sunroom for his alibi, destroyed her credibility, making her appear mentally unstable to the very authorities she had summoned. Part 5, The Grand Finale and the Consequence of Control. Patty Chadwick left the HOA inspection feeling a cold, righteous fury. She was not crazy, she was targeted. Jake Sorensen had not just been annoying, he had masterminded a campaign to discredit and humiliate her. Her business, her reputation for composure, and her sanity were all on the line. She spent the afternoon drinking an entire bottle of expensive Chardonnay, staring out her window at Jake's quiet yard. She noticed a glint near the fence line, a small, dark shape. She finally saw it, a tiny microphone, perfectly camouflaged as a bird feeder, pointing directly at her house. The full, chilling scope of Jake's plan slammed into her. He hadn't just been making noise, he had been listening. Recording her private moments, her frustrations, her phone calls. This was no longer a noise dispute. This was a violation of privacy. Patty waited until sunset, composing a chilling, accusatory email to the HOA, the local police, and Jake's employer, which she found through an aggressive, vindictive online search. She included photos of the microphone and a frantic account of the sonic assaults. But she wasn't done. She needed direct action. She needed to silence the source. At 10 p.m., armed with her wine-fueled resolve and a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters, Patty crept out her back door. The Parrots were the true culprits. She just needed to cut the mesh of their cage, let them fly out, and they would be gone, Jake's instruments of torture silenced forever. The moon was high, casting long, stark shadows. She crept along the fence line, heart hammering against her ribs, until she reached the sunroom. The external window was a heavily reinforced screen, covered by a thick, vinyl curtain. She didn't have time to cut that. She followed the sound of a very faint, repetitive click-click-click to the side of the sunroom, where a small, secondary door led to the temporary, sound-dampened annex attached to the garage, where the birds currently resided. She put the wire cutters on the latch, but before she could snip it, the low, click-click-click sound abruptly stopped. A slow, deliberate, perfect imitation of Jake's voice echoed from within the dark garage annex. "Patty. Don't." Patty froze, the wire cutters digging into her palm. Her breath hitched. She hadn't made a sound. How did he know? Jake had anticipated her. The click-click-click was a small, high-sensitivity pressure plate disguised beneath the mat leading up to the annex door. The moment she stepped on the mat, it triggered the most unsettling sound in Captain's repertoire, the immediate, conversational voice of his owner, telling the intruder to stop. She recoiled, stumbling back onto the wet grass. The voice, Jake's voice, sounded again, this time with a hint of cruel, mocking humor. Then, the true grand finale began. The sounds Jake had collected from the neighborhood over weeks, the constant yap-yap-yap of the aggressive terrier 3 houses down, the loud, throbbing bass from the teenager's car stereo that Jake's sound mixer had amplified to impossible levels, and the frantic, unmistakable scream of a smoke alarm, erupted all at once. It was a cacophony of everything Patty hated, turned up to 11, coming from a source she could not access. Patty scrambled back, tripping over her own feet, adrenaline turning into sheer terror. She looked back at the sunroom, and this time, the window curtain was pulled aside, revealing Jake. He wasn't smiling. He was simply watching her unravel. In her desperate retreat, she snagged her foot on a low-voltage wire running along the ground, a wire Jake had left out to power an aesthetic garden light. She didn't just fall, she pitched forward, face-planting into the muddy dirt of her own flower bed. The wire cutters flew from her hand and landed with a clang against her expensive, noise-dampening fence. She lay there for a moment, covered in mud, the agonizing, amplified noise of the neighborhood assaulting her ears, her perfect white robe ruined, realizing the consequence of seeking control over her neighbor's life. Jake hadn't just won, he had engineered her breakdown, and she had just confirmed her own unstable behavior by attempting to break into his property. Part 5 Beat, Karma/Shocking Twist. Patty's final, desperate attempt at direct retaliation, vandalism/animal release, was anticipated and countered by Jake's final sound trap, exposing her own criminal intent. Her clumsy, muddy fall cemented her humiliation, providing Jake with the ultimate, justified climax to his special concert. The sirens that finally arrived 20 minutes later were real. Jake, after watching Patty stumble and fall, had called the police himself, reporting an attempt to trespass and vandalize his property, providing them with clear, time-stamped video footage from the motion-activated camera he had installed by the garage annex. When the police arrived, they found Patty Chadwick on her property, covered in mud, smelling strongly of wine, screaming hysterically about sonic terrorism and devious tropical birds that could impersonate police sirens. Next to her lay a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. Given the video footage showing her attempting to tamper with his door, and her erratic behavior, the police took her away for public intoxication, trespassing, and a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Jake, calm and cooperative, simply showed the officers his sound-dampened sunroom, explaining that his birds were professional mimics, and that Ms. Chadwick had been severely stressed by the heat and was having a tough time. The aftermath was swift and final. The HOA, upon reviewing the police report that listed Ms. Chadwick's erratic behavior and the confirmed trespass attempt, dropped all prior noise complaints. They issued a warning to Patty instead, citing her for conduct detrimental to the community. Patty's freelance consulting business dissolved. Her clients, having witnessed her escalating unreliability and the explosive emails she had sent, quickly cut ties. She lost her contract, her reputation, and eventually, the perfect suburban house she had fought so hard to keep perfect. 6 weeks later, a moving van was parked outside Patty Chadwick's pristine home. She emerged, looking defeated, a shadow of her former self, and climbed into a rental car, disappearing without a single goodbye. Jake, standing on his back deck, watched the departure with a serene lack of malice. He hadn't sought to destroy her, only to give her exactly what she had given him, the continuous, soul-grinding annoyance of targeted disruption. He walked into the sunroom. Captain and Echo were preening, their work complete. The house was quiet. The sun was warm. Jake opened the door to his backyard. The sound of children's laughter, the innocent, joyous shriek of Maya and Leo splashing in the pool, echoed through the neighborhood. It was the sound Patty had originally complained about, the sound of uncomplicated life. Jake smiled, a deep, satisfied smile. He finally had his peace and tranquility. He had settled the score, not with violence, but with the subtle, brilliant, and perfectly targeted weapon of sound. "Well done, boys," he murmured, tossing a handful of cashews into their bowls. "Concert's over. Time for a long intermission." Captain, the African Grey, looked up at him, tilted his head, and let out one final, perfectly clear sound, the high-pitched, insistent ping of Patty Chadwick's automated coffee maker. Conclusion beat, quiet justice and final irony. Patty is gone, and the backyard returns to the sound of children's joy, confirming Jake's victory and the re-establishment of the natural order. The Parrots' final, small mimicry of Patty's morning routine serves as a lasting, unsettling reminder of the price of weaponized annoyance and the chillingly effective, special concert.